Hi, my name is Richard Azariga from Microsoft. In this video, we're going to look at how to connect to the Office 365 APIs from an Office add-in. Now, unfortunately, an Office add-in doesn't have the best concept of an identity. So even though I sign into Office these days, that identity isn't immediately available to my add-in. If we're building a document-centric add-in, so one that runs in Excel, PowerPoint, and Word, there's zero concept of identity in the object model. I can't go get that identity. If we're talking about an Outlook Mail add-in, I can get an identity, but it's really specific to the Exchange APIs. So I can use it to work with Mail and Calendar and Contacts. But if I wanted to go to something like SharePoint or OneNote or maybe Yammer, that's where I'm going to have to do some additional user intervention so that I can get tokens to talk to those services. I have a pretty big blog post that talks about some of the primary challenges you're going to run into trying to do this, but I'm going to kind of illustrate the two major challenges. The first challenge is pop-ups. So when I build an add-in, any domain that I need to load in that frame, that add-in frame, must be registered in my add-in manifest. So if I were to open the add-in manifest for this project, if you look over across the top, I have a bunch of tabs and one is app domain. So any page that I'm going to load that is not my app, I need to put its domain in here. So you might say, great, put login.microsoftonline.com and you're good to go. Well, that's true for some users of Office 365, but the majority of users of Office 365 might leverage something like a federated login, which means when it's federated, that organization owns the login form. They own the entire domain that the login is being performed in. And therefore, it's absolutely impossible for an add-in developer to anticipate all the different domains that might get loaded in a login process for Office 365. Because again, they're going to be subscription specific. There could be thousands, millions perhaps. And so what happens when one of those domains isn't in this app domain section? Well, what happens is that page gets popped out into a separate browser window. So it's going to cause a pop-up. So rather than trying to avoid that, because it's really unavoidable right now, you should embrace it and just see if there's a better way we can deliver that pop-up experience. And we're going to look at one of those ways that we can deliver a good pop-up experience. The second thing is the big challenges around caching that sign-in experience. We don't want the user every time they use our add-in to have to sign in. We want to be able to maybe cache that for a certain duration. And so one of the great things is we can cache things like the refresh token that we get when we talk to Azure Active Directory. So that first time we sign them in, we can get that refresh token and we can cache it some sort of way. Now, we want to make sure we do the refresh token and not the access token. An access token has about a 1 hour lifetime, whereas that refresh token, it has a 14-day sliding window of lifetime. And when I say sliding window, that means as long as I keep accessing it and getting a new refresh token, I can extend that up to 90 days before a user is required to actually sign in again. So that can provide a much better experience. So I'm going to illustrate a couple of different ways that we could cache that refresh token for the user. And so I'm going to illustrate these together in a solution that I'm calling the customer detail mail add-in. And so it's going to deal with the proper ways that we can go off and do a authentication flow with Azure Active Directory, get tokens back, pass that to our add-in from a pop-up, and then how we cache that the correct way. So for the sample that I'm going to show you here, I'm going to use something called DocumentDB in the background to cache my tokens. So DocumentDB is a NoSQL solution similar to MongoDB that Azure provides. So it basically stores JSON documents. And so if I go out here to my DocumentDB and refresh this, I'll go to my user collection. And I have no users in my system right now. So there's none in here. And what's going to happen as soon as the user accesses our add-in, we're going to collect a little bit of information about them. And then we'll populate it more and more as they finish the sign-in process. So let me run this add-in. This is a mail add-in, and I'm going to go ahead and click on customer detail. So as soon as this launches, it's going to say, hey, you've never used the system before. You need to log in with Office 365. Behind the scenes, if I were to refresh my user table, we've already collected a user. And so here it is. And you can see it's a JSON document, and we have this hash. Well, this is actually a best practice that the Outlook Exchange team have put together that says we can create a persistent lookup for a user by combining an Exchange ID with an authorization metadata endpoint. And this is all documented out on MSDN, and I cover it in the blog post. But ultimately, this won't change as I launch this app again. So if I were to just tab off of this, I'll close this application, launch it again. It's going to find that exact same record. It's not going to go create a new one. So if I go back to users, you'll see that it's the exact same. I didn't create a new user by relaunching that. That hash is always going to hold true. At this point, though, I don't have a refresh token, so I need to do a flow to get a refresh token. And so one of the ways that I'm doing this, because of the limitations that we might run into by communicating between a pop-up and our add-in, because remember, this add-in runs in a very isolated sandbox. In addition to that, there's all kinds of browser things that are in place these days to stop pop-ups, right? Pop-ups from the very get-go were kind of determined to be malicious by hackers, by advertisers, and so browsers have built into them all kinds of mechanisms that can stop regular pop-up communication. So what our sample is going to do, it's actually going to, the pop-up's going to get the token, but it's going to go push it into the add-in through a WebSocket. So it's actually going to go through the server to send that token back to the add-in. In fact, we'll do that here. Let's go ahead and click on the login with Office 365. And what you'll see is it's actually going out to login.microsoftonline.com. And without me doing anything, it's completed. It says the customer detail add-in has all the detail it needs. You can now close this dialog. And you can see it brought me into the application here. So I'll just go ahead and enter in some information for this user. We'll say user address is 7000 State Highway 121. And it's going to be in Irving, Texas, 75039. And the work number, I'm just going to put some junk in here and say add contact. Now this application is like a CRM app, so you can see I get the details about the customer. I can look at other associates at that domain of this sender. I can look at invoices that are open. I can go get their actual location. So as you can see here, it pulls them up on a map for that exact location. I can go write some notes. So I'll just say another note, and I can submit that here, and that has a breakpoint. But you can see I'm able to go and push all this information in here. Did I press play? No. There we go. I've added this other note. I can even deal with attachments at some point in the future. But the key thing here is now if I were to close this add-in and come back to it, what you'll see is I'm not prompted to log in. It automatically brings me in because this user record has now been completed. If we were to refresh this and click on that user, what you'll see is we have all the details about this user. We have a refresh token that, again, we can push this out 14 days at a time up until we hit 90 days with that. And then we even store some additional information like the user's name, their email address, initials, and even their picture, so we can display their picture from another location. So this concept of being able to cache this is very powerful because I never have to have that user sign in at least for 90 days at a time, and I can always look up their record by this hash. And so we can use this same pattern. There was two patterns here. Again, one was we used WebSockets, more specifically SignalR, so that the user never had to refresh anything. We could easily communicate with our pop-up back to the add-in, and then we're able to be able to pull up data for this user at any given time by leveraging this refresh token here. So those are two of the main patterns for working with the Office 365 API in an Office add-in. Definitely check out the blog that goes into things in a little bit more detail and why we're doing certain things the way we are. But this will change over time. We're going to make this identity experience better, but for now, you don't have to wait. You can still develop great add-ins that connect to our services.